Welcome to this explainer. Okay, look, the news cycle right now is absolutely chaotic with this sudden announcement of the US-Iran peace agreement. It's a lot to process. So to really cut through the noise and help you grasp exactly what's happening, we decided to create a video that breaks this monumental global event down visually. We're going to take all those breaking reports, the expert analysis, the official statements, and transform them into clear, structured visuals. That way, you can understand both the massive breakthrough and, of course, a highly complex fine print. All right, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit 1. The deal is reached. 2. Terms of the agreement. 3. Washington and Tehran's motivations. 4. The Israeli perspective. 5. Unresolved geopolitical questions. And finally, 6. The next 60 days. Okay, Section 1. The deal is reached. Announcements from Washington and Islamabad. So the news first broke where a lot of news breaks these days on social media. President Donald Trump posted this statement on Truth Social, just boldly declaring the deal complete. And, what's really fascinating here is the timing and the focus. He actually posted this on his 80th birthday, kind of capping off Nick's very visible frustration over delays. And notice how the quote instantly pivots to economics, right? He says, "Ships of the world, start your engines, let the oil flow." It completely highlights the immediate end of the U.S. naval blockade, making it clear that using global commerce is priority number one. Then, literally moments later, we got official confirmation from halfway across the world. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif released this statement. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the massive diplomatic machinery that was churning behind the scenes. I mean, Pakistan didn't just announce it. They actually emerged as a central mediator, passing messages back and forth between Washington and Tehran. Plus, the Prime Minister specifically thanked Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey for their help. So this wasn't just a two-party negotiation. Not at all. It took a whole coalition of regional powers to drag both sides to the table. Moving on to Section 2, Terms of the Agreement. Let's look at what's actually in this Memorandum of Understanding. Okay, so what did they actually sign? Here is our factual baseline. First up, a 60-day ceasefire. Now keep in mind, it's not a permanent peace treaty yet. It's literally just a 2-month pause. Second, the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Third, the immediate end of the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ships. And finally, a conditional lifting of economic sanctions on Iran, provided they actually stick to the deal. It is absolutely crucial to understand that these immediate actions are pretty much just about stopping the shooting and restarting the shipping. That's the core of it. Now, you might be wondering, why does that shipping matter to you? Well, because of this number right here, 20%. That is the massive chunk of the world's global oil and liquefied gas that travels straight through the Strait of Hormuz. When that strait is closed or even just contested, global markets totally panic. And that directly impacts your wallet through rising global inflation, way higher gas prices at the pump, and spikes in food and fertilizer costs. Reopening this strait, it's the relief valve the global economy has been desperately waiting for. Section 3, Washington and Tehran's motivations. Why sign this deal right now? Let's compare the incredibly different forces pushing these two sides. For the U.S., the pressures are hugely domestic and economic. Rising inflation and the cost of living are just squeezing American voters. And with the November midterms creeping up, affordability is a massive political issue. Ending the war to cool down prices, that's a top priority. But over on the Iranian side, the pressures are purely existential. They're dealing with crippling economic sanctions, plus they suffered a catastrophic blow on literally day one of the war with the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And that event has triggered a rapid internal power shift toward the hardline Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. To really get a grasp on how big that internal shift is, we need to look at this insight from U.S. Middle East analyst Aaron David Miller. He points out that taking out Khamenei was deeply transformative. The traditional balancer in their government is just gone. Miller notes we're watching Iran transition from divine power, meaning domination by the clerics, straight over to hard power, domination by the military and the IRGC. The regime hasn't collapsed. Actually, analysts are suggesting they might emerge more emboldened, risk-ready, and hardline than ever before.
All right, Section 4, the Israeli perspective, unfinished business in the region.
Now we get to the giant elephant in the room. The ceasefire reportedly includes an end to military operations in Lebanon. But here's the thing. Israel is not a part of this deal. Just days before this agreement was announced, Israeli strikes hitting a Hezbollah command center in Beirut almost blew up the entire diplomatic effort. So sure, the US and Iran have agreed to stop fighting. But from Israel's perspective, the threat of Hezbollah and Iran is still very much an unresolved existential issue. And that reality translates directly into deep political vulnerability for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli public largely views Iran as an existential threat, and Netanyahu has explicitly promised to eliminate the dangers from both Iran and Hezbollah. So, if a ceasefire halts the Israeli offensive in Lebanon and forces a withdrawal without actually dismantling Hezbollah, well, Netanyahu's domestic opposition is absolutely going to argue that he failed in his primary mission. For Israel, this whole agreement feels very much like unfinished business.
Section 5. Unresolved geopolitical questions. Let's talk about the massive hurdles that are still standing in the way.
Look at this contrast between what's been agreed to and the actual fine print. On the left, the agreed terms are super straightforward, right? A 60-day pause, opening the strait, ending the blockade. Done. But scan over to the unresolved issues, and the hurdles are just staggering. What happens to Iran's massive nuclear infrastructure and all that highly enriched uranium? What about the billions in frozen Iranian assets? Is there any plan for their ballistic missile programs, which literally just caused havoc across the whole region? And what about the relationship with proxy militias like Hezbollah? None of this is settled, not a single bit of it. And that unresolved nuclear question brings up the ghost of the JCPOA. You might remember it as the 2015 Obama-era nuclear deal. It basically restricted Iran's nuclear enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. President Trump famously pulled the U.S. out of that deal, promising he could negotiate a much, much better one. Well, interestingly, former President Obama just recently weighed in, saying he strongly doubts this new, yet-to-be-seen agreement will look significantly different from the 2015 version. So this is setting up to be a massive test. What kind of actual verification mechanisms can they put in place this time around?
Which brings us to a really crucial point, captured perfectly by negotiator Aaron David Miller. He quotes an old Hollywood adage here, saying, "An oral agreement isn't worth the paper it's written on. Where is the text?" Experts are demanding to see the actual verified document, because as of right now, the gaps on these core issues, especially that nuclear file, are as wide as the Grand Canyon. Without a documented performance-based agreement, a simple memorandum of understanding can turn into a memorandum of misunderstanding really fast.
And finally, Section 6. The next 60 days. The countdown officially begins. Let's walk through the immediate timeline, because the clock is definitely ticking. This week, mediators are facilitating pre-implementation technical talks. Then, on Friday, June 19th, there's an official signing ceremony in Switzerland. From that exact moment, the clock starts on a strict 60-day window to negotiate the single hardest issue on the table, the nuclear file and the permanent lifting of sanctions. Essentially, they've bought themselves just 2 months of time and space to solve arguably the most complex geopolitical puzzle in the world. And meanwhile, the rest of the world isn't just sitting back and watching. According to former NATO ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison, European leaders are gearing up to use the upcoming G7 summit in Geneva and the NATO summit right after to organize a multinational effort. The goal? Ensure the Strait of Hormuz remains open for the long haul. Countries like the UK and France are already preparing a joint naval effort. They want to establish a cohesive alliance that permanently limits Iran's leverage to ever close the strait and wreak economic havoc again. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. We have a 60-day ceasefire. The ships are moving again, which is great. But if the fundamental gaps on the nuclear issue, the ballistic missiles, and the regional proxies remain as wide as the Grand Canyon, what happens when this 60-day clock runs out? Have we actually achieved a lasting peace here, or is this just a 2-month pause before the exact same crisis explodes again? Thank you so much for watching this explainer. Keep your eyes on Switzerland this Friday, and we'll see you next time.